I'm interviewing Mr. Edward Curmi at his office in North Melbourne, Victoria. It's the 30th of August 1984, a Thursday. I'd like to begin by asking for the raw biographical facts concerning your father's career, an outline, if you may, from the date of birth through to when his career in Malta and...
I'm afraid I cannot tell you very much about his career in Malta before he came to Australia, except that he was a lieutenant in the Royal Malta Artillery in the First War, and that at some stage after that, before he came here in 1936, he was the Commissioner for Labour. But I don't know much more than that. He worked in the public service all his life, certainly in Malta.
Do you know anything about where he served during the war?
Yes, he served at Gallipoli and in Egypt, as far as I know. I don't know of any other places.
And would the Gallipoli experience have influenced his view of Australians in any way? Did he ever refer to this?
No, I don't remember his referring to that. No.
So I believe he took up the first appointment as Commissioner in 1929.
He came here in 1929 for, I think, 1 year. I don't think he was officially appointed then. I think it was just an investigation to see something of Australia with a view to coming here later. I think his actual appointment started in 1936.
And so it was his intention to eventually settle in Australia in this position? Or was it?
I do not know. Once we got here, he certainly was happy to stay, but I do not know whether he had wanted to come here before he was appointed. I don't know that.
Regarding his work here with the Maltese, who, by the way, all speak very, very highly of him, what type of work do you remember him doing most commonly for them?
I did not have much to do with his work. I am the youngest of the family. I suppose for that reason, if no other, I didn't know too much. He maintained an office in Queen Street, Melbourne, which is the centre of the city. He had files, to my knowledge, on more or less every Maltese who came to Australia. I think he looked after anyone who got into any kind of difficulties. I don't mean legal difficulties, but any problems with settling in. And he did a lot of publicising of Malta by way of giving talks to all sorts of groups and institutions all over the place. And particularly during the war, he did much more of this. And I think part of it was to raise money for relief in Malta.
Yes, I believe he was on the public morale committee.
I don't remember particularly, but he certainly was very active giving talks during the war about Malta. And I got the impression it was at least partly to raise some money for relief in Malta.
And some other people I've interviewed, mainly Maltese people who did emigrate during the time Captain Curmi was Commissioner, mentioned how he or one of his staff would visit them on the boat or at the wharves if they disembarked.
I cannot tell you anything about that, except that I know there was a group or probably some kind of committee of Maltese in Melbourne, and some of them, I think, used to make some big effort with new people coming here. I can remember a Mr. Paul Paris, I don't know whether you've heard of him, who lived down Elstonwick, Elwood way somewhere, and he certainly did a lot in connection with that.
So the Maltese Social Society.
I can't remember the name. Yes. Yes.
Presumably your father working closely with the community at large and wasn't solely a government representative.
I don't know that he certainly would have attended any functions, put on by the Maltese Social Group or any other Maltese group. I don't think he was what you'd call, in Australian terms, a very sociable person. I don't see him going round and having fun with Maltese people. I don't think that was his style at all. He was a fairly strict person who took his work very seriously, and I think was always aware of the fact that he was the sort of frontispiece for Malta in Australia, and always had to appear with great dignity and so forth. Yes.
And what were his attitudes to Malta, say during the war period? Did he, was he a patriotic type of father?
He was certainly fully behind anything that was going on in Malta. He was, he remained fully Maltese culturally and psychologically, and I'd say all his interests were basically Maltese, though I think it's fair to say he was very much interested in things British. But I suppose that's not unreasonable, because the way to get on in Malta in those days particularly was to be as British as you could be. But between Malta and England, I suppose you'd have most of his interests.
What was his background in Malta? Do you know anything about
I do not know very much about that. I had the impression his father was also in the government service in Malta. He was one of 8 children, the eldest. He was the eldest of 8 children. I really don't know much more than that.
And then your own family?
I have 3 sisters and 1 brother, and I'm the youngest of 5. We said we came here in 1936 when I was 9 and my eldest sister was 15.
And when did Captain Curmi retire from his position?
He officially retired in 1950 when he was 60, but he was asked to stay on. He did for 2 years, till 52.
And then he was replaced by...
Then he was replaced... Stavala, yes. And there've been a few others after that, of course. Yes.
You would know my cousin, Eunice Mayor. Eunice was his secretary.
Yes, I was thinking of that. Yes. She was married to...
Joe
Sant, that's it. That's the name. It rings in. Yeah.
All her parents are my auntie and uncle.
I see. I remember meeting her a few times, years and years ago. Yeah. Oh, it's not. In fact, I have a suspicion she might have come here as a client some years ago. But a very faint memory of that. Yes. And of course, the person who would have given you a huge amount of information, but unfortunately is now dead, was his secretary, Miss Cox, Virginia Cox, who actually lived near us in Surrey Hills, but died 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. Yes, she would have been a fountain of information.
I believe there was a Mr. Bella too, who worked with him in the early years.
I don't remember any man working there sort of full time. Of course, they moved to Canberra, you know that. They moved to Canberra after Father retired. The office moved to Canberra. But I don't think... There was a Mr. Caruana who worked with him. I think he's still in Canberra now, isn't he? Joe Caruana. He was working with Father for a while, and then he went back to Malta, and then he came back here.
I believe that your father was held in high regard by Arthur Caldwell, who was Minister for Immigration.
I do know he had a lot to do with Mr. Caldwell, who was, as you say, the minister at the relevant time. I do not know what kind of regard he had of him. Certainly my father always spoke well of him as being a person of, understanding and, knowing what he was about. But I don't know much more than that, unfortunately.
And, can you think of any events or incidents of significance or of anecdotal value even that deserve to be noted in, eventually I hope to have a book published based on the thesis.
I have great trouble at any time thinking of things on the spot. I might be able to think of something if I put my mind to it. The only sort of things that come to mind were the fact that my father, as I said earlier, always took his position very seriously, and he was always on his best behaviour and always very well dressed. He made a point of that, which I think he thought was necessary for his job, to give a good impression of Malta, which probably was quite sensible because, as we were saying earlier, the Mediterranean people, particularly a few years ago, were not held in very high regard in Australia, and I think he was doing his bit to counteract that. He was very ambitious. He liked to get on with the right people. He always was very happy to go along to the sort of government functions to which he was invited because of his position. I find it, as I said, I might think of something more later on perhaps, but I find it difficult to think of things like this.
Well, was he active in terms of attending important functions?
He was invited to any Commonwealth government functions because he was a member of the diplomatic corps, and he was representative in Australia, not just in Victoria. He was commissioner to Australia. And of course also he was invited to Victorian government functions as a sort of a courtesy. So he did seem to be reasonably busy. He fairly frequently went to Sydney and Canberra on business of various sorts. But I think he certainly made a point of going anywhere, to any government functions which he considered part of his job and in which he tried to present an attractive picture of Malta.
Did he travel up north at all, do you know?
He did. No, he certainly did. I can always remember his saying that there were a lot of Maltese people in Queensland. In fact, when we first came here, he was given the choice of living and having his office either in Melbourne or Brisbane, presumably because they were the centres of Maltese immigration. But he chose Melbourne. But there are obviously a lot of people in Queensland.
Yes.
And he went up there, not that often, but he did go up.
I recall that he spent many a year negotiating for permission from the Australian side to allow young children to emigrate. There was a group of orphans, in fact. Ended up in Western Australia.
Yes.
Institutions there.
Yes.
Do you remember talking about that? Or?
I'm afraid I don't. It's just a faint memory that there was something about a group of children going to Western Australia, but that's all I'm afraid.
He also battled, if that's the right word, strongly argued for recognition in practice of the Maltese as full British subjects.
Yes. He always made a point of making it clear that they were British people, and whenever they were lumped in with other Mediterranean people, he always made a point of saying that they were of British origin, something like this. Yes.
And how many times did he return to Malta?
I can't say exactly, but it would have been... it would have been probably quite a few in earlier years particularly. I have a memory of 3 or 4 in later years. I couldn't tell you exactly, but it must have been every 2 or 3 years. He went probably for a short trip on business by himself. And then in later years he went a couple of times with my mother, who was English, and they went on to England also.
I wonder about the immediate post-war years in Malta, if he returned at that stage, and how the devastation would have affected him. Yes, I was wondering, had he returned in the years...
Oh yes, sorry, straight after the war. I'm sure he did, because presumably during the war communications were not easy, but I cannot tell you anything specific about it. No. No, I have an idea that he went back as soon as possible after the war to report, but I'm afraid I do not remember what his impressions were.
What were his attitudes towards Australian people? Did he ever express people and the country?
Yes, I know what you mean. I think that he was very much, well, that he remained always very much broadly a European, particularly a Maltese. I think he would have preferred that we lived in what you might call a more Maltese way than an Australian way. However, he accepted that was not possible. But he was not a gregarious person. He didn't socialise much with people. I don't think he had any particular friends among the Australians. We made contact with people through, well, I suppose more friends of the children at school and then parents that we met. We used to have some sort of social connections with them, but I never got the impression he really enjoyed it very much. His hobby was various kinds of craft, making things, and he had a few friends with whom he shared in that. But that was about the strength of it as far as I can remember.
Yes, I was going to ask about such things as hobbies, because, well, you know, I have read things about him as the official man.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But as a person, what sort of person was he? Temperament-wise, and interests at home?
He was very interested in woodwork. that was his main hobby, was woodwork. I can remember in Malta, which we left when I was 9, and in the first house we had in Kew here, and the second house in Camberwell, in each of these he had a good room in the house that was his workshop, not a shed of any sort, a good room in the house. And he spent virtually every evening there, and a lot of his weekend time, making things out of wood, furniture, some of which we have at home. Other members of the family have other bits. He would spend days designing things. He would then spend weeks making them, and then more weeks polishing them. Very fine work, and enormous patience, incredible patience, and literally take months to make things. But he obviously enjoyed it, because he spent virtually all his free time doing it. And then in later years, I think when perhaps his hand, he suffered from Parkinson's disease in later years, and I think his hands got a little bit shaky. And I don't know, maybe his patience wasn't so good, but he got into a bit of leather work later on, and made a few things out of tortoise shell, I can remember, and a few smaller items out of ivory. He was a member of the Arts and Crafts Society in Melbourne, which had a little shop in Collins Street and used to sell odds and ends there, but he was certainly very interested in that.
Did he have what one might call the intellectual interests?
He read a lot. He was a great reader. I suppose a lot of people were greater readers then before television. He was very interested, I would say broadly, in European history and church history. Yes.
Was he devoutly religious?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Was he active at all in terms of promoting Maltese culture, in addition to his official functions in terms of trade and immigration? Did he take that sort of interest in promoting identity?
I suppose in his numerous public talks would have been promoting Malta and the way of life in Malta and things like that. I did not attend any of them. I might have attended one or two, mainly sort of perhaps driving in there, when I was a bit older. And he always had slides, pictures of Malta, I can remember that. That would have been promoting Malta. I don't know whether you'd call it promoting sort of Maltese culture. I don't know that people were very interested in that at that time. They were interested to know something about Malta, but I doubt if there was any attempt on his part or any interest on the part of the listeners to sort of do things, sort of perhaps, as people now say, take an interest in foreign cooking, Italian cooking or French cooking or something. I don't think there was any attempt to sort of influence people to do anything in any sort of Maltese way, but just to inform people about Malta and tell them about it. There was always a great connection with Catholic institutions and Catholic things, because of course Malta was well known to be a solidly Catholic place.
Then again, Britain.
I think the reason I asked about the Maltese culture being promoted is that I can imagine in those days assimilationism was the guiding principle rather than recognition of cultural diversity and so on.
Yes.
within the Maltese community itself. I was wondering, would your father be inclined to promote this sense of ethnic identity through the language, for one example, or would you be more inclined to encourage them to, speak English properly and get it with a view to being integrated and being able to advance?
I'm afraid I cannot answer that. I did not have much to do at all with his contact with Maltese people. No. I myself had very little contact with Maltese people until I started the practice. But as a family, we had very little to do with the Maltese people in Australia. So I can't really tell you much about that.
Well, what about as a family? Did you speak Maltese at home?
No, because my mother was English, so we've always spoken English. Yes, so that was simple. We never spoke Maltese. I think my eldest sister, who was 15 when we came here, had learned a little bit of Maltese, but I think she's really about the only one of us that knows any.
Oh, I see. So
I don't know any Maltese.
As a child, you didn't learn any in Maltese?
No. I can put, I can't put a sentence together. I know a few words, that's all. Yeah. Yes.
And so Captain Curmi was replaced by
George Stavala in 52.
But he remained involved in those activities for a few years later. Is that right?
You mean activities
Of the Commission?
Well, no, he retired. He was right out of office in 52. 50, well, he was supposed to retire.
Oh, I see.
He went on till 52, but then after that he was finished, fully retired.
And then what happened after 52?
Oh, he had nothing to do with the office, as far as I'm pretty sure. Oh, he just lived in retirement at Camberwell, and decided to stay in Australia when all the children were sort of settled by then, and they just stayed here. And he went for 2 or 3 trips to Malta and England. Including one with us in 1953, my brother and I, in 1953. That was the year after he retired. I'd forgotten about that. And just stayed on living there, not more or less occupying his time with hobbies and reading.
And in which year did he die?
Yeah. He died on the 5th of March 1967 when he was 76 years old, his birthday being in October.
What was the cause of this thing?
Oh, he had suffered from Parkinson's disease for some long time, must have been at least 10 or 15 years before he died. Which is a disease that gets where the person becomes progressively less able to control himself, and his hands began to shake, and he became much weaker, and just a progression. He just died of that eventually. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for your time and the information.
I'm afraid it's not very much. Yeah.